Mitch again with the 1925 Ford Model T. In this video I'm going to be doing actually a bit of a request. This one I've had about at least 20 or 30 people maybe asking me to do a video on oiling and lubrication and that sort of thing. So that's the subject of this video. We're going to really get down into the details of greasing and oiling and lubrication. I'll run through how to do an oil change. You won't actually do one because it doesn't need one at the moment, but I'll show you how to do an oil change on a Model T, and we'll go through with the grease gun and with the oil can, and I'll show you how to grease up the grease cups and that. And yeah, let's get stuck into it. So we're going to be following this lubrication chart here, which basically shows all of your grease cups and your oilers on the Model T. Shows you where they all are and how frequently they should be oiled / greased. And yeah, so we'll go through that now, and I'll show you where everything, where all the lubrication is to take place and roughly how frequently. Now there's basically just a guide on this chart here. It says some of them say every 200 miles, every 500 miles, every 50 miles and such like that. You don't necessarily have to stick to those figures, you know, to the mile or to the kilometre or whatever, but it's handy to know where they all are and how often roughly you should be lubricating them. So what we'll do is we'll start from the front of the car and we'll work our way back. So what we'll do now is we'll start with the hubs and the spring hangers, and we'll work our way back from there. Okay, so we'll start with the front wheel hubs, and you just undo the hubcaps like so. They're just threaded on. And just have a look in there, and give you a nice little close-up shot there, so you can see these have actually already got some grease in them. These have been they have been maintained and greased in that. So you can see that at the moment they're pretty good. But when we do go to grease them, all we do is we basically put the grease in this bit here between this nut and the outside wall of the hub there. Basically just pack the grease in there nice and tightly, and that should be good for several hundred, or if not thousands of miles. But most people tend to do it every few hundred. It's a good idea to keep a close eye on them. So we'll just pop that hub cap back on. Okay, there we go. So that's that one done. Okay, so now we're going to move on to the left and right front spring hangers, and all you do is you actually just lift up these little caps here and you pour some oil in the cup there, and it goes through and it lubricates the spring hanger. Now my oil can with the little pump action gadget on it is unfortunately damaged, so I'm going to have to do this the old fashioned way and pour oil in using the cap off of the oil bottle. So I'll just put the camera down a sec so I can open this oil here, and then we'll pour some oil in. Okay, so we have the cap full of oil here, and all we're going to do is we're just going to put a few drops of it in this cup here, and we'll do the same on the other side as well. So I'll just put the idea here, so we just open the cap here and we'll pour some oil straight into the cup, and as you can see it doesn't really take much, so we'll just let that settle in and close the cap just like that, and then we'll repeat the exercise on the other side of the car. Now over this side you can see that the cap's actually missing off this one. I've got to find a new one. So anyway, the same exercise, just put a drop of oil in there just like so until it soaks down in there, and maybe a touch more, and then we'll clean off the excess oil. And that's all there is to it on the front spring hangers. Now while we're on the front spring hangers, there's two little oil cups at the front that people often miss, and that's because they're actually tucked right in here. I don't know if you can just about see, I'll move my finger out of the way, just in here you can see two little oil cups in there. So they're quite easy to miss, and a lot of people do miss them, but they also need to be oiled, so I'll go ahead and put some oil in there, and then we can move on to the next step. Okay, now while we're still up the front of the car, there's some more points that need to be oiled / greased as well. We've got the grease nipples here on top of the kingpins on both sides, and also we've got the oil cups on the steering linkage here, and they also need to be oiled. So this one has oil in it, and obviously having a grease nipple, this one has grease. So we'll just go ahead and I'll pour some oil in the steering joint here. and that's all it needs. And then we'll go ahead and we'll do the other side as well. So I'll just jump across here, and in this steering joint as well, we'll just pour some oil in there until it's full. And there we go, and that's all there is to it as far as those particular joints goes. And also we need to do the kingpins, so we'll go and grab the grease gun, and we'll put a couple of pumps of grease on there, although they're probably alright at the moment, but it wouldn't hurt to put 1 or 2 pumps on each one. Okay, so what I've got here is I've got my grease gun. We'll go ahead and we'll pop some grease on the kingpins, and by the looks of things it looks like it's already been done at some point, so we'll leave that one, and I'll just wipe off the excess grease there, which is oozing out a little bit. There we go, and we'll go ahead and we'll grease the one on the other side. Okay, so we'll just pop some grease on the other kingpin here. This one looks like it needs a little bit. Oh, it seems to be oozing out a bit there. There we go. I'll just pop that off. And we'll just wipe off the excess grease. And actually it was coming out, the grease was coming out around the back here, so we can see it's already got enough in it, so that's good. Okay, now what we'll do, we'll move on to the next point. So the next item on our lubrication list is the steering box here. And as you can see, there's a grease nipple here, so it's just a couple of pumps of grease on there until you can see it oozing out there a little bit. And then that's the steering box done. Now, some older Model Ts actually had a grease cup there, as opposed to a grease nipple. But as you can see there, this one's got a nipple on it, so we'll just use the gun on that one. And then we can move on to the next spot. Now, as you can see there, there's a bit of grease already oozing out of there, so we won't add more grease to this one at this stage, but just pointing out where the lubrication point is on the steering box. So just a quick recap of what we've done so far. We've done the front spring hangers, we've done all 4 hubs, we've done the spindle bolts or kingpins on both sides at the front, and we have also oiled the ball sockets on the steering here. Now, what's the next step? So we've done the steering post bracket, which on this diagram it shows a grease cup. It is, as you can see by the radiator design there, it's an older Model T, whereas mine actually has a grease nipple on it. So that one's been done. So next thing we'll look at is the engine itself. And in terms of engine oil and that, we'll run through how to check that, and we'll also look at the commutator or timer, whatever you want to call it, up the front of the engine there. So we'll look at both of those now, and then we can move on. Now, just like any internal combustion engine, the Model T engine being no different, it also needs lubrication. And so what we're going to look at here is the 2 most important points on the engine where lubrication is required. The first of which, of course, is the engine itself. Now, I think in previous videos I've shown you how to check the oil, but what we'll do is we'll just check that once again. You actually go down underneath the car on the passenger side, and what you'll see here is 2, I'll see if I can turn the exposure up here a bit. What we've got here is 2 little petcocks here, and the idea with these is you open them, and you can see oil's dripping out of the top one, and it's definitely going to drip out of the bottom one. Oh, there it goes. Now, what you actually do, if the oil drips out of the top one when you open it, you've definitely got enough oil. If you don't get anything out of the top one, but you do out of the bottom, you've sort of got enough oil in there to run. You sort of get your home sort of thing, but it's a good idea to add some oil if you ever get that low. But basically that's how you check the oil level. There's no dipstick in a Model T, as I've said previously. Basically that's how you check the oil. You open up those petcocks there. Ideally you want to have oil dripping out of the top one, so you know that the level's good. So the level's good on this one at the moment, so that's good. Now, just before we move on, on the subject of oil changes while we're under the car, if you are going to do an oil change, it's very simple to do. There is a sump plug, like on most cars, right under the centre of the bell housing there. There's your sump plug there. Simply undo that, dump the oil, and yeah, and obviously, like you do with a modern car, just make sure that the engine is warm, or has at least been running before you do that, so that the oil is nice and runny and will flow straight out. And the other thing to do also while you're at it if you haven't already got one, I strongly recommend getting one, is your oil screen, which is just under the transmission cover under the floor there. And if you take a look at my previous video, or one of my previous videos I should say, I actually show you how to clean the oil screen. So that's where you pour the oil. You can pour the oil in there actually. Other than that, you just pour it in straight in through the filler point under the hood as I showed you previously. Okay, time to move on. And what we'll do now is we'll have a look at the timer, and we'll check the lubrication in that. Now that actually doesn't need to be flooded with oil as such. What you actually want to do is have just enough in there to lubricate the roller inside, just so that it doesn't seize up. Okay, now it's a little bit tight to get the camera in here, but I'll do my best to show you. When you want to lubricate the timer, and the timer is this gadget here, basically what you do is you undo this bolt here, which is just tucked away behind the oil. In fact, I'll take that off. That's the oil filler cap. You can see this bolt just here. Well, what we do is we loosen that one off so that this arm here becomes loose, and then you can actually take the timer cover off to give the interior a clean. So if you check out the video that I did on the ignition system, you'll see how that works inside. So you take that off, then you take this pin out here and slip the timer cover off, then you can give it a good clean inside. If all you're doing is lubricating it, what there is actually on the top here is a little tiny cap. I don't know if you can just about see it behind my finger there. Little cap there. That's where you put just literally a tiniest squirt of oil inside, just to lubricate the roller arm inside so that it doesn't seize up inside there, and just keeps it running smoothly. If you do need to add oil to the engine, this is where it goes, in this hole here, and that flows down through the crankcase and obviously back into the sump and the gearbox as well. So we'll just pop that cover back on now because we've already checked the oil, that's got enough in it. There we go. Okay, so that's lubrication in the engine bay taken care of. Let's move on to the next one. Well, I almost forgot. One other critical thing in the engine bay, we don't want to be forgetting about this one, is the fan hub up here. Now, if you review my video on the fan and the pulley system itself, I do actually show you how to take that apart and lubricate it. So we won't do that in this video, but yes, it is important to make sure that the bearing in there is actually kept lubricated, because otherwise you'll end up with the problem that I had, and that is the fan will actually, it won't seize as such, but because it relies on a film of grease between the two brass bushes in there, it will actually cease turning. So it must be completely packed with grease, which is what I've done, and then you'll have a nice smooth running fan. So I believe that is everything in the engine bay. So now we'll have a refer to our chart again and see what the next item is on the list. Okay, so we've done the engine and the transmission. Okay, so we've checked the oil level in the crankcase. We've done that through the two petcocks underneath the car. The fan hub, we've done that. Now this particular one doesn't actually have, well, it is a grease cup, I suppose you could say, but not in the traditional sense of the word. We've done that. So now we need to have a look at, okay, so the next one we need to do is pull the floor pan out, and we'll have a look at the universal joint on the front of the prop shaft there. Okay, so what we've done here, as you can see, is we've taken out the floor pan in the front of the car, and what we're looking at here is at the front of the drive shaft. So we have a large grease cup on top of the universal joint here, and further back we have a smaller grease cup right here, and this is for the front bearing of the drive shaft. Now obviously both of these need to be kept lubricated, so what we'll do now is I've already had this one off, but what we'll do, we'll take this large one off first off the universal joint, have a look inside, and you can see the cup itself is, well, it's more or less empty, and there's not much grease left in the top there. So what we actually do is the grease cup itself, that's this piece, we fill this up right up with grease, you know, pack it as tight as we can, and then what you actually do is you pop that back on there, and the more you screw it down, the more it pushes oil, or should I say grease, into the joint. So I'll go ahead and pack this cup full of grease now, and we'll pop that back on. Okay, so you can see what I've done here. I've gone ahead and filled the grease cup right up with grease, packed it full. Now all I need to do is literally put that back on top of here and thread it in. And as I tighten that, grease will be pushed down into the joint. Now we don't need to push it all the way down because there'll already be grease in the joint itself. Obviously the more I push that, the more the grease will go in. So just a few turns is enough, like so. And that one's done. Now we move on to the drive shaft bearing grease cup here. This is only a little one. And as you can see, it's still about 3/4 full of grease, so we'll leave that one. But what we'll do, we'll just put it back to the tightness that it was originally, and then we'll just turn it down, turn it a couple more turns, like so, just to push a bit more grease into that bearing. And that's those two done. So now we'll have a look at the next grease point. Okay, so the next item on our list is the control brackets, and it says here to oil every 400 miles, or basically just common sense really. Keep an eye on things. If you live up a dusty road, then it's a good idea to oil it a bit more frequently. But the control arms, basically what that is for where the handbrake lever crosses the car from left to right there. So by control arm, what it actually means is this arm here that runs across the car, underneath the universal joint there, and then up to the parking brake lever there. And what they've actually got on each end is these joints here, and what it means is just to put a drop of oil in the back of each of those every so often, just to keep them properly lubricated. So I'll just be able to get a cap full of oil and just drizzle a bit in there each side. There's not a grease cup or an oiling point as such. Basically you just drizzle the oil into that gap there, and it will find its way in, and we'll do that on both sides. So I'll just grab some oil. Now I'll try and film this as best I can, but literally all we're doing, I'll just try and get a decent grip on this oil here. All we're after doing is just pouring the oil just in there like that, and we can let that drip onto the ground. That's not a problem, I can clean that up. There we go, so the oil has found its way into that joint there, and we'll just use a rag to wipe off the excess there. And now we can see that joint is now lubricated, and we just do that every few 100 kilometers or so. And now there's just one more on the other side, and I'll just put the camera down to do this one because it is actually on the other side of that lever there. Okay, so with those parts lubricated, the next item on our list, we'll do the rear spring hangers next, and they're much the same as the front ones. I'll just move up to the back of the car. Okay, so here we are at the back of the car. You can see the spring hangers here, much the same as the front ones. You've got an oiler on the top here, so we lift that up and pour the oil in the top there, and the same with the one that's just move my hand there. There's one in this little joint right in there, and it's the same story on the other side. So we've got I picked up a rock there. We've got the oiler cap there. We pour oil in that one, and we also pour oil in this one under here. Now the ones underneath can be a little bit difficult to get to, so what I like to do is actually jack up one of the wheels, but not actually jacking it up on the axle. If you can, try and jack it up on the chassis rail. That way the axle and the spring arrangement will actually drop, and it will actually give you more space to get in there and put the oil in the bottom one. But I'll just go ahead and put the oil in the top ones for now, just to show you how it's done. That one and on the other side, and then we'll move on to the next thing. Okay, now while we're at the back of the car, the only thing left to do here, apart from the diff, which has already been filled with grease, and I'll show you where to put that. The only other thing to do is the hub brake cams on both sides, and that's with the built-in parking brakes, not the Rocky Mountain brakes that I have actually installed additionally myself. Okay, so we'll have a look at the cams for the hub brakes, and then I'll show you where to put the oil in the diff. So I'll pop down underneath the car here, and pardon my video work here. So what we're actually looking at here, and I'll just get my hand in there to show you, is this cam right here. Basically it's a case of putting oil in there just to lubricate that joint, and if you like on the end of this control arm as well, of which there is one on both sides of the car. So yeah, this is the cam that it's referring to. You just put some oil in there
just to lubricate that joint there. You don't want a heap of oil in there, because obviously you don't want oil getting inside and onto the brake shoes, otherwise you won't have any parking brake. So we'll go ahead and I'll put a drop of oil in each of those, and then I'll show you the diff. Now, because I haven't got my trusty oil can, what I'll do is actually, pardon me, dip my finger in the oil and just go ahead and put that in there manually. As I said, you don't actually need very much in there, so just a couple of dabs on the tip of your finger is quite sufficient. And you just push that into the joint. I'll put a little bit more in there. As I say, you don't actually need a heap. It's just for lubrication. And there we go, that's the cam on that side done, and it's the same principle on the other side. Okay, and the last item at the back of the car is the differential itself. Now all you need to do, what you've got is this plug here. You simply undo that and you put some very heavy diff oil in there. I think it's about 600 weight from memory. Haven't had to do it for quite some time. It doesn't need doing now. So yeah, 600 weight oil in there, and that should be good for quite some distance. As I say, mine doesn't need doing at the moment. We've also done the spindle bolts or kingpins on both sides of the car. We've done the steering ball sockets on those steering control arms. Those ball sockets on both sides, we've oiled those. We've taken a look at the commutator / timer and showed you how to put oil in through the little vent on the side of that. We've taken a look at engine lubrication, where to put the engine oil in, and where to fill that up, and where to check it as well underneath with those two petcocks. We've also had a look at the control brackets for the parking brake either side. And while we're on the engine bay, we've had a look at the fan hub, and you can look at that in more detail on my fan video that I also did. We've looked at the universal joint, which is at the front of the prop shaft there, immediately behind the gearbox. So we've filled up that grease cup and greased the universal joint. We also had a look at the drive shaft front bearing, which was that smaller grease cup just behind the universal joint there. So we've greased that one up. And we've also had a look at the hub brake cam on both sides, left and right. So this is on the rear wheels. So those two cams, just the tiniest drop of oil on each one, just to lubricate those joints there. We've done the rear spring hangers on both sides there, so both of these guys. And again, just like on the front axle, you've got a little tiny hidden one. So you've got the spring hanger, you've got the top and the bottom portion of it, and both of them need to be oiled. And we also looked at the diff to make sure that every so often you pack some grease into there. Obviously make sure it's not completely full, because obviously as the diff is in use it will warm up and grease obviously will expand, or I should say oil. It is a heavy oil rather than a grease as such. Yeah, make sure that the diff's not completely tightly packed full, otherwise you'll be blowing seals and that in your axle ends, which we don't want. Now the one other thing that we haven't looked at yet, and I'll give you a couple of moments there to see if you can figure out which one I've missed. And it is in fact the steering gear, the actual gear case on the top, just underneath the steering wheel itself. So we'll just have a quick look at that. We won't take the steering wheel off, but I'll show you basically what happens. And yeah, so we'll have a look at the steering case now. Okay, so immediately under the steering wheel is this little can-shaped piece here, and what this actually is your steering box. Now what you've actually got in there is a 3-to-1 reduction gear in there, so basically it takes it reduces the amount of turns of the front wheels relative to the steering wheel. So basically what you do is you pop the steering wheel off and you undo this nut on top here, and be careful with that one, by the way, excuse me, I'll say that again, be careful especially if you're working down in the floor pan I have actually hit my head on this thing, and I can tell you from experience, it bloody hurts. So be careful with that. So basically, undo that nut there, pop the steering wheel off, and it's on a spline, so be careful with that. Once you've got the steering wheel off, then you can actually undo this cap here. It's threaded. You can undo that and pack some grease into the gears in there. Now I've already taken the liberty, gone ahead and done that a while ago. It doesn't actually need doing now, but that's where the gear set is in there. So be careful with that. There's 4 very small gears in there. You've got 1 in the middle and 3 planetary ones around the outside. Interestingly enough, a little bit like the actual transmission gearbox itself has planetary gears in it. So does the steering box. Okay, well, I think we've covered just about everything now.
Well, that brings us to the end once again of one of my educational Model T videos. I hope this video has been educational and useful to you. And yeah, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and check out the website as well. And also don't forget to join the Facebook group. There's always plenty to see and do on there, and plenty of fellow Model T enthusiasts to have a chat to as well. Well, that's it from me. Once again, thank you very much for watching. Don't forget, as I say, subscribe to the channel. There's always going to be new videos being put up. And yeah, this video, as I said earlier in the video, was one that's been requested quite a number of times. So yeah, so if there's any other videos you'd like me to do, or if you've got any questions, just pop them down there in the comments. And yeah, well, we'll see you again very soon. Thank you very much for watching. Bye for now.